Welcome, everybody. My name is John Schreiber, and I'm the CEO of Njpac, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Arts Center's virtual Business Partners Roundtable at home this afternoon. We are really pleased to be co-hosting this event with our friends at the Newark Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the ongoing economic revitalization of Newark. Njpac is really proud to be a member of the Alliance, and I'm happy to serve on its board and to support its goal of evolving our wonderful city into an even better place to work, live, learn, play, and do business. For those of you who have not joined us before, Njpac's Business Partners Roundtables are a series of virtual conversations with the state and the nation's most prominent business executives, thought leaders, and public officials. Before the pandemic, we'd host these events in person at the Arts Center since last March. The series has gone virtual, and we're so pleased by the range of executives, office holders, and other leaders who've been able to join us and share their insights at these online gatherings, which we now hold at least once a month. For our regular series attendees, thank you for rearranging your calendars to meet with us at the end of the day instead of at the beginning of business hours when we usually meet. I want to thank our Business Partners Committee Chair, Joel Sherman of Atlantic Tomorrow's office, for his ongoing assistance with this series. And I also want to thank our friends at PNC Bank for being our sponsors. Today, we're going to be talking about New Jersey's new business landscape, which has been transformed by the pandemic, certainly, but also by Governor Murphy's new business incentives and forward-looking economic policies. Before we dive in, however, I'm pleased that we have with us today a really good friend, Latha Reddy. Latha is the Senior Vice President, Inclusive Solutions at Prudential Financial and is the chair of the Prudential Foundation. Latha is also the chair of the Newark Alliance board, and she has been an advocate, ally, and advisor here at the Arts Center for many years. Latha, thank you for being here today, and tell us a little bit, please, about the work of the Alliance.
Great, thank you, John. It's great to be here, and as John mentioned, I have the honor of serving as the board chair for the Newark Alliance, and so wanted to add my welcome and thanks for joining us today. We are really pleased to partner with Njpac to present this discussion and offer you an opportunity to hear directly from leaders who are playing a critical role in guiding the state's economic recovery and in creating a more inclusive and equitable New Jersey. At the Alliance, the Newark Alliance, we're focused on the revitalization of Newark, the state's largest city. And we're active in promoting the city as a preeminent destination to work, live, play, and to do business. Through the collective work of our diverse members, we have created innovative partnerships and citywide initiatives which leverage Newark's competitive assets and have generated economic growth for the city. Now, despite the current challenges and uncertainty that we face, the Alliance is committed to exploring new strategies and creative solutions to advance Newark's renaissance into one of America's great cities. But we know to do that, the interplay between state and local policy is critical. So during today's discussion, you'll hear from the state's leaders on how they're leveraging new initiatives and policies championed by Governor Murphy to support a resurgence across the state, including in Newark. We know that you'll gain many valuable insights, and I want to thank our panelists in advance for joining us. And back over to you, John.
All right, thank you, and thanks for everything that you do and that Prue does for our city, for the Arts Center, for so many organizations on a regular basis. It means the world to all of us. Let me introduce today's panelists who have an especially broad and informed view of our state's economic climate. First, we welcome Jose Lozano, who is the president and CEO of Choose New Jersey, New Jersey's leading nonprofit economic development organization. Prior to leading Choose, Jose was chief of staff and vice president for corporate services and governance at Hackensack Meridian Health. He also served in the Obama administration as deputy chief of staff and Homeland Security advisor at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We're also pleased to be joined today by Michele Siekerka, who is the president and CEO of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, the nation's largest, most influential employers organization, which advocates on behalf of New Jersey's businesses for policies that'll make our state more affordable and regionally competitive. At the NJBIA, Michele leads a coalition of more than 100 business and nonprofit associations across the state, which is tackling the economic challenges we're facing during COVID-19. Before joining the NJBIA, Michele served as Deputy Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And last but certainly not least, we welcome Tim Sullivan, who became CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority in February of 2018. The NJEDA is the state's principal agency for driving economic growth and is committed to making New Jersey a national model for inclusive and sustainable economic development. Before taking on this role, Tim served as Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. And before that, he worked in investment banking at Barclays Capital and Lehman Brothers. And to moderate today's discussion, we are joined by Tim Lizura, who is the Arts Center's Senior Vice President for Real Estate and Capital Projects. I know many of you know Tim from the many years he spent at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority himself, where he served as president and CEO from 2012 to 2018. Today, he's helping the Arts Center transform its campus into a vibrant arts and education district that will be a generational destination for Newarkers for many years to come. So just to remind you of our timing this afternoon, this is a 45-minute session of Q&A by Tim that will be followed by 15 minutes of questions from you. So if you'd like to ask our panelists a question, you can do so at any time by typing it into the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A box when you hover your cursor at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Tim, the floor is yours. Have a good time.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, and I'm extraordinarily excited about this panel. It's going to be a fascinating conversation with friends and colleagues. That is, this topic, which is near and dear to my heart, near and dear to the Performing Arts Center and Newark Alliance's heart, New Jersey, and growing our businesses here. So let me just jump right in and start with an opening question, really to all the panelists. And I think we have really interesting points of view. Tim, as your view for the head of the New Jersey EDA, Jose as the face of New Jersey's marketing efforts, and Michele representing the largest cross section of employers in New Jersey. Let me just start with the broad question: how are we doing in New Jersey? How are we positioned, and how does our future look? I'm going to take prerogative and ask my alma mater, Tim, to kick us off on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks, John, for hosting us, and Lada for your great introduction as well. And Michele and Jose, always good to be with you. I feel like the three of us end up on a lot of panels together, and even when we don't always think the exact same thing, always spirited and well thought through, and always fun to be with both of you as friends and colleagues. Look, there's no doubt 2020 and 2021, Tim, have been incredibly challenging years for New Jersey and for New Jersey's economy. The smaller you get on the sort of the size scale of businesses, the harder it's been. So this has been obviously, first and foremost, this is a public health crisis, but right behind it, it's an economic crisis for particularly small businesses, particularly minority and women-owned small businesses. The good news, or sort of the silver lining or light at the end of the tunnel story here, is that I think the momentum that we're poised to bounce out of this with is incredibly strong. I think all the fundamentals and the things that Governor Murphy has been focused on since his earliest days of his administration, in terms of innovation and clean energy and entrepreneurship, and our focus on international marketing that Jose leads the charge on and we sing back up on. Those are all the exact right priorities, and I think those are even sort of stronger strategic imperatives for us coming out of this crisis. Hopefully we'll have a bit of a wind at our back coming out of Washington with an administration I think that is more aligned with with Governor Murphy's policy imperatives and areas of focus like clean energy and offshore wind and all those things. So I think while it is still pretty stormy and the clouds are still pretty heavy, you can feel them starting to part and you can feel that the momentum is, I think, beginning to surge. The Economic Recovery Act that Governor Murphy signed at the very beginning of the year, I think, is a big part of that as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about in greater detail. So I think we're about to emerge from a pretty crummy, tough period, but I think we're ready to emerge and get back on that path to kind of growth and strengthening and addressing some of the longstanding challenges in the economy. The governor's budget Tuesday also is a kind of a milestone pushing in that direction as well. So I think it's been tough, but we're coming through. It's like the end of a prize fight. We're still standing.
That's well said. And Michele, how about you? What do your members say? What are you hearing from them when you talk about the state of play?
Well, it is a challenging time right now and has been for the past year as business has literally, clung on through COVID. I do think that there's optimism. The good news about 2021 is we knew what was handed to us. Going into 2020, everybody came in very excited. We're at the height of a great economy. People were, getting ready to make investments all over the place. People had really aggressive strategic plans, and then like literally the world stopped. Coming into 2021, we knew what we were facing because we knew that this was going to be around with us. We have to learn how to live with COVID and how to do it responsibly. And businesses leaned in. I have to say, I'm really proud to stand up and represent the business community each and every day. When I see businesses out there checking the safety boxes and the protocols on how to keep their workplace and those who frequent their facilities safe at every turn, taking this very, very seriously. And really stepping up and stepping in, I'm proud to be the voice out there for them. But let's not kid ourselves. We have our challenges, right? We had a tough business climate before in terms of tax and mandate that has continued. We are thankful for a budget that has no increased taxes this year, but we do have a concern looking forward to the sustainability of that spending. And I know we're going to talk about that more a little bit as well. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll say, absolutely coming off an extremely challenging time, still challenged, cautiously optimistic as we go into 2021 further.
And Jose, you've got an interesting position. You get to not only do you have an interesting board, which has, I'm sure, an opinion about this, but you get to talk to all of these prospects. What are you hearing, and how are you positioning your conversations with some of these companies?
Look, from the number one, I am extremely optimistic that 21 will be our year for New Jersey to shine, right? I think what the pandemic has done is highlighted for so many of us that already knew that New Jersey is such a great place, not only to do business, but to raise a family and to live and to actually, recreational and seeing the theater and so forth like that. And I think when it comes to the business attraction side, many of these companies are looking at states that have these great values and are handling the pandemic well. I think this is New Jersey's time to actually shine. So I feel extremely optimistic. We're going to come out of this great. And we're seeing it right now. Our pipeline of companies that we choose with, of course, our brother and sister organization, EDA, we are seeing a significant uptick of companies wanting to call New Jersey home and putting us on that top of that list, right? And so optimistic, 21 is going to be a great year.
Great. So I'm going to ask you, Tim, probably the most unfair question you're going to get today, because I know these things are all like your children's, but 3 years into the administration, what would you say your most the accomplishment that you're most proud of in the chair down in Trenton there?
I thought the unfair question was going to be when the hell are the incentives going to be ready to go, which is a question I'm getting all the time. But I'm sure I'll get that at some point, and maybe I've now deemed it unfair in advance. But hard to pick among the privilege of having to get to have this job and to be a part of Governor Murphy's team is extraordinary and a kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity. I think two things I'd say, kind of in the response category and in the long-term category. Response, what our team has been able to do to try and be helpful and support small business around COVID recovery, I think is something I'm enormously proud of. We made some more announcements today with the Sustain and Serve program, another $14 million to support 160 plus or minus restaurants, buy 1.5 million meals for needy folks who have food insecurity in their lives all across the state. That brings us over the $250 million number for the amount of money that we've put on the street to support small business in this crisis. And so, the team, doing that all, working remotely, doing that all while everyone has been dealing with, the COVID crisis in our own lives in whatever way it's impacted us. I'm really proud of that. The other thing I'd say is the package of the recovery and reform package that Governor Murphy signed on January 7th is something I'm really proud of. I think as we've thought about how to not only strengthen and improve sort of the bread and butter incentive and business attraction programs, but also broaden the toolkit and have a more comprehensive approach to thinking about economic development and the long-term kind of entrepreneurship and innovation and inclusive innovation strategy that I think is embedded in that bill and in those programs, is something from a sort of a policy perspective I'm enormously proud to be been a small part of making that happen. I think the proof will be in the pudding as to how that goes, and I think the tools that we've developed are very, very both potent from a development perspective, but also progressive and thoughtful and inclusive, and doing all the right things to advance diversity and inclusion as we think about how are we creating jobs, who gets to benefit from that growth and development, how are we thinking about equity and inclusion, how are we thinking about addressing inequalities and longstanding gaps in the economy while also growing. And I think that's the balance we tried to strike. So the proof remains to demonstrate that what we've been proposing is going to work. But I think that I'm enormously proud of that bill and that package of policy tools that we have in our toolkit now.
Yep. Yeah. We'll definitely get back to that. We want to. I know our listeners want to hear more about it. So we'll circle back to that. Jose, when we think about what you do, a lot of what you're doing is internationally focused, which must be all in itself an extraordinary opportunity to be a part of. So talk to us a little bit about what do you hear from the international community when you're going out there and pitch in New Jersey? What's kind of some of the takeaways? What's a typical conversation, and what's the most interesting thing you've heard from somebody coming out of one of those conversations?
Yeah, so New Jersey's always been perfectly positioned for an international audience, right? When a company's ready to expand into the U.S. market, entering the Northeast, more likely than not wanting to enter the New York City area, is something that they want to do. But when you start to articulate on some of the great assets that New Jersey has, it's a really easy narrative to try to convince them that New Jersey could provide them a much better situation, not only to start the business, grow their business, attract the employees, places to raise a family, great communities to live in. So what we're starting to hear now, you remember, they also have access to, within 2 hours of New Jersey, you have access to 38 million consumers, right? And that is a gold gem for an international company who wants to put a footprint into the US. What we're hearing from folks is, they wanted to enter the New York area. They're starting to feel a little uncomfortable. I think folks are wanting to see a little bit of a campusy feel. And so we're getting a little bit more of a spike wanting to enter some more of those suburban areas that maybe have not gotten so much attention in the last few years, but are now starting to get a bit of attention. The challenges have been on the federal side is some of the travel restrictions have been a little bit of a challenge. And so we at Choose have been extremely creative in the way we actually show some of these sites. Either we've gone visually and done some visual tours. We've provided a lot of additional information that we would just do when they're actually here on site. And so a lot of our momentum that we had has slowed down significantly, but we think as travel restrictions start to lessen and folks want to start traveling, I think we'll pick up exactly where we were. I mean, right now, we have in our pipeline a bit over 100 companies that we're having conversations with are from around the world. And so I think international companies are still 100% interested in entering the US market. The question is where, and I think the second we have an opportunity to showcase firsthand what New Jersey has, I think we'll get them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Michele, actually now that sparks a question. I mean, you have so many international companies as part of your membership. How closely are you able to, or your members able to collaborate with Jose in some of those business attraction trips and helping to pitch and let's get the word out of how great New Jersey really is as a business?
We work very closely. I'm on Jose's board, and I sit around the table with all the business leaders, and we collaborate. When trips come up, there are always opportunities for business members to go on those trips, and they do. They serve as ambassadors, and many of those who attend those trips are our members. So I think we really work hands in glove on the marketing side. We're all here to want to discuss the positive attributes and assets of the state of New Jersey. Again, you talk about a good entry point to America. We're a good entry point because of our location and our assets.
Yeah, I always think the outbound marketing is the hardest thing for our constituents in New Jersey to get their hands on, because if we do it really well, it's something they don't actually see, right? Because it's being targeted to either other countries, other jurisdictions, other regions of the U.S. So people, I heard lots of times, what are we doing to market the state? Well, we are marketing the state, but if we're doing it really well, it's not inwardly focused; it's outwardly focused, right? So it doesn't show up on the TV as you're watching it or in the local medias. Michele, you had brought up the budget. So people who are smarter than me often say budgets are not about numbers; they're about priorities. And so, what are you hearing from your members? What's your reaction to the governor's budget that he introduced this week?
Yeah, so honestly, I'll say mixed bag. We're certainly very positive again on no new taxes, but there is a significant concern about the amount of spending. I mean, this is a 29% increase over 4 years and 11% increase over 1 year. Now, let's take advantage of the fact that we have some extra assets to reinvest in ourselves this year, and those investments are going in very smart places, right? Pension, education, infrastructure, et cetera. So where we're not challenging where the investment's going, the concern is the sustainability of that level of spending at $44.8 billion, because while we have some windfall this year, let's not forget, we've got some windfall because we borrowed last year to the tune of $4.3 billion to fill up some surplus to carry over. Our revenues are performing better than anticipated. And we also raised taxes last year that drove new revenue into this fiscal year. And so, we're going to ride the wind of that money this year, but we have to ask ourselves, where's that money going to come from next year? Because a lot of this is one-time ability to invest this year. And just one more thing is just our focus. And Tim can appreciate, I say to Tim every day, Tim, how can I get you more money? How can I get you more money? How can I get you more money, right? Because Tim's money goes directly to our members. And while we're thankful for 200 million, in the big scheme of things, we know that the demand is so much higher than that. And so we're going to continue to work very, very hard at driving, how can I get Tim Sullivan more money to give out to my members?
Well, I assumed you meant that, Tim. I wasn't sure, but if you can get us more money, that'd be great too. I'm quite sure. Tim, let's we're talking about budget, but hand in glove to budget is economic activity, right? So what drives revenue is more businesses, more jobs, more transactions, more sales. You want to speak a little bit about the interplay between the incentives and revenue and the budget, and I assume that you probably don't want to say anything about the budget itself, but talk about maybe how the incentive bill that the governor signed will help drive that budget for the future to address the concerns Michele was having.
Yeah, a couple things actually. I'll make a couple quick comments on the budget, which is I thought it was an extraordinary proposal, both fiscally responsible as it relates to things like the pension payment for the first time in 25 or 26 years, whatever it's been. Just a remarkable thing that is, to sort of begin to turn the tide on that longstanding challenge, and also making significant investments. I think things that are on the EDA's list from the budget are things we're enormously excited about. The top of that list is the wind port all the way down in Salem County. The governor proposed a $200 million direct investment to basically get the construction started this year on phase 1 of that project, which we think is a game changer. People who don't work for the state have described that as the biggest development project in South Jersey in a generation, and I'll second, since it wasn't my talking point, I'll second it. So making those kinds of investments, I think, in the long-term trajectory and kind of the long-term industry development and diversification of the economy, I think is a really smart and prudent thing to do, particularly again in a year in which there are some extraordinary budget circumstances. It's a great kind of capital investment in a long-term asset for the state. In both the Economic Recovery Act and the budget, there's substantial resources, substantially more than there's ever been, at least in recent memory, of state allocation of money for small businesses directly. So between EDA, DCA, NJRA, between the budget and the Recovery Act, there's a little more than $250 million of direct small business support. Some of that is kind of COVID impacted and COVID relief, and some of that is more COVID, I would characterize more as COVID recovery. How do you sort of help businesses that have been resilient and toughed it out through this terrible time, but as normalcy returns, get back on their front feet, make investments in new equipment and expansion and new space, particularly on Main Street, with a particular emphasis on minority and women-owned firms, which when the sun was shining and the wind was at their back in good times, struggle to access capital on an equitable basis. Really trying to make a big dent in solving those long-term challenges. So I think there's tons of resources there that I think are prudent and really smart to invest. Look, I think the incentives package or the recovery package, I think sets us up well to really add more growth to the economy and to help grow our way out of some of these challenges that are longstanding and kind of multi-generational as it relates to the fiscal picture. So whether it's the Emerge program, which is the successor to Grow, whether it's the Aspire program, which is going to help do the more the kind of mixed use transit-oriented development, build the kind of vibrancy in our cities and our places that are served by transit that I think Jose was describing earlier that folks want. I think one of the things that's great about New Jersey's offering, and I'm just repeating things I hear Jose pitch really successfully to lots of businesses. We have it all. We have really good, dense, urban, high density walkability type scenarios. We need more. We've got rural, we've got suburban, we've got everything in between. And so having, I think strengthening our kind of urban, transit-oriented, walkable, bikeable, 24/7 or something that close there to offering with more mixed use development, I think only enhances our competitiveness long term, plus makes big investments in new sectors. So clean energy and offshore wind is at the tippy top of that list. Film and television, digital media. Jose's been busy trying to build that industry and attract lots of investment from outside the state into the state. That's an opportunity. I think if you think about what combination of technology plus COVID has done to disrupt the film and television sector, and obviously I know the folks, John and Tim and the team at the PAC are quite mindful of all this because it's been challenging for your lives too, and also creates opportunities. We think there's an opportunity to grab a bunch of business opportunities for the state in film and digital media, either from New York, from California, from other places throughout the country, because with a tax credit plus some supportive infrastructure investments, we think we have an opportunity to really climb the league tables in what we can do for film and digital media. So I think there's a really nice balance of both focus on small business and focus on growing the economy. And also, and I'll maybe save this for another question, creating more new young companies that are going to get big and prosper. We have not had nearly enough companies akin to the Audibles of the world that start small, start with a dream, and grow into great big successful companies that either get acquired, go public, do both, employ lots of people, pay lots of wages, pay lots of taxes. Thank you. We've not seen nearly enough of those throughout the state. We've got a great roster of Fortune 500 companies. Prudential, of course, who's more well thought of than Prudential. We need more of them. We need more that are growing and joining the ranks of the Prudentials and the J&Js and the Mercks of the world. And so the Innovation Evergreen Fund, I think, is a really important tool to help grow more and grow and catalyze and support more young New Jersey companies growing and scaling into big, mid-size, and large, bigger, mid-size, and large companies. I think that's a huge, sustainable, durable growth kind of strategy.
So many companies, small and large, would be intimidated by all of those programs, all of those resources. What do you set in place, and how do you advise our small business listeners and even our big corporations to get smart on these programs and to avail themselves if it's appropriate?
That's what we got Jose for. That's what he's fantastic. He explains it all to everybody. It's great. No, it's a serious question.
Okay.
Look, I think a couple of things. I think we have collectively, and Jose and his team, and us and our team, the governor's office, Business Action Center, I think have really tried to up our game with respect to the way we partner and push out information to different channels. Because a Main Street kind of mom and pop customer set is different than an international Fortune 500 that's thinking about where it wants to put its next U.S. operation. Neither better nor worse, just different sales channels, different marketing channels. And so we've really tried to push more transparency. We actually launched a website part of the EDA's website a week or two ago about just to begin to sort of provide sort of a thumbnail sketch of the new program so that folks can begin to understand many of them have goofy marketing names like Emerge versus Aspire, and if you're a regular human being, you'd have no reason to know what the difference between those two things are. And even if you're an insider, they're still confusing. And so we're trying to begin to sort of decloud, I think, some of that mystery, for lack of a better word. And then we've got a ton of, particularly once these programs are up and running at full stride, and we're in the middle of drafting regulations and coming up with the application process and all that good stuff that is unsexy but very important. Once those are running at full gear, then we have an enormous amount of marketing and shoe leather work to do, in state, out of state, in New York, on airplanes around the world. Jose and his team obviously will be front and center and leading that charge. But so that's you can never do enough marketing and awareness. I think during COVID, one lesson I think we learned, and if you think about, you would never want to do 2020 over again if you could avoid it, but things we learned from it, we got better as an entity at pushing out and doing really targeted messaging. We, EDA, at targeted messaging in lots of languages to different audiences than we'd never really focused on in the right way before. Whether those are, again, through different, language, the Spanish language media, for example, something we never really did much of before or didn't do enough of before. So really trying to push out and broaden who we speak to and how we try to get those programs out. So that's, I think, something we'll hope to carry forward. But Jose should comment certainly on the, how do we get people to know about these programs and use them?
Right. I certainly wouldn't be critical of naming any, being the father of the name ERG. I certainly will never be critical of naming of a program, that's for sure. Jose, is your conversations with these companies changed now with this? And also, why don't you start to address or speak a little bit about, we talked about geographic attractions, but industry attraction is extraordinarily interesting to talk about. So we talked about film and other than getting you in a movie, how are we having conversations in that industry and those? So both sides of that conversation.
So one, no one will ever pick me up for a movie. So that's actually pretty clear.
Oh, I doubt that.
When you have very limited resources for marketing, we really needed to hone in on speak to the audience that needs to be spoken to in very direct language and going to them very specifically where they're listening to. So there was the way we approach a tech company and the tech industry is very different than we approach the life sciences, which is very different than we approach the movie and the digital industry. Secondly, when you start to look at the attraction side, we know we go to Israel for tech and life sciences. We know we go to Ireland for medical device. We know we go to India for some manufacturing on the life sciences, but we also do on the tech. So what we started to do, when the EDA and the team all in 2018 started to identify the sectors that we needed to focus on, we developed strategies on where do we need to go and attract folks from and with those sectors. And we started to hone in specifically on the languages that they use. And so, you can feel my pain a little bit because I often get criticized, like, I don't see your marketing. I was like, well, if I'm doing my job, you shall never see my marketing because you're already in New Jersey, right? And so, but we don't do very broad things. Taking out a page in the New York Times on a Sunday is about $150,000. For $150,000, I can speak to millions of folks digitally and very specifically targeted with specific language that we want to and in information that they find relevant. And so we are, like Tim said, 2020 just forced us to sharpen our pencils a bit more and be very targeted and go very specific and be abbreviated, like get to the point and target them. But the way we start to talk about New Jersey, it depends on the sector and the region, but we always have, from the very first day, been leaning in about the good assets and the great assets that we have, be it the logistics, the infrastructure that we have, the workforce we have, the locations, the place to raise a family, all of those things we lead with. We have never led with incentives and so forth. So you've got to get the company to want to be there. And the incentives is intended to really close that gap. And so just because we now have incentives, which we haven't had for a bit of time, doesn't change our approach. We just add an extra 2 slides to our PowerPoint deck on it, and we make sure we give them some Sullivan cell phone number. So that's the only thing that's changed.
Okay, so Michele, your members, I am sure that they were anxiously watching this legislation move through the process. Do you imagine now with this, or shortly after regs are produced, that we have a floodgate of in capital investments that was on the sidelines waiting to happen through your members, or do we still have a lot of work to do on that front?
Well, for the companies that are here right now, there are certain programs that are best available for them. Some of those larger programs are really more on the attraction side than the retention side, to be honest. Some of our members, there are. It's still a state government program. There's a lot of boxes to check. There's a lot of bells and whistles in there. There's a lot of devil in the details. And so, Tim and his team do a great job on terms of the technical assistance of working through this. But these are still government programs that for some businesses can be challenging to tap into. And, I would just say that we're excited. We supported the programs. We were advocating for 18 months to get these programs back because we knew we had a void. We needed them to close the delta because New Jersey is such an expensive state. to live, work, raise a family, right? And at the end of the day, if someone's looking at Trenton or they're looking at Morrisville to put their next office, when they do the numbers, unfortunately, Morrisville by default is going to win, and we need these to close the delta. We need these incentive programs. So hopefully now this will close the gap to get them to consider Trenton instead of Morrisville. But, you know, I'm just going to say that this is a little bit of a wait and see. I'm going to say jury's out on how the programs will be appreciated by the business community, knowing some of the detail in some of these programs. But we are out here advocating for them and trying to provide information and resources to ensure our members can get connected to those that they think that they qualify for.
So it's interesting. Let me pivot a half a step and talk about a post-COVID world, right? So now companies are may have been holding off making decisions because it was tough to make decisions in the midst of the pandemic. And as we've all said, we've learned, even in our own business, of how to operate differently. I would imagine almost every business has probably learned how to operate differently over the last 12 months. What are you hearing from your members about things like coming back to the office in force? What does it mean? And we'll open this to the balance of the panel as well. What does this mean to getting companies to move into larger spaces and expand footprints? So what are you hearing from your members on that aspect?
Yeah, you know, I mean, mixed bag, but a lot of, hey, we figured out this hybrid and remote, you know, really works. My people are more efficient than they've kind of been forever. So now, you know, business executives are making their plans now. They're leaning in and they're looking at their real estate. I think the real estate world, I mean, we're all sitting on pins and needles to see how this is going to play out. The footprints are going to shrink, no doubt about it, as people realize that certain aspects of their workforce should remain remote because pretty much they're not in the office a lot of the time anyway. Think of some of the functions, you know, sales, for example. And so it'll be interesting to see what this means to the real estate footprint. But I will say one more thing that I'm hearing from our larger companies who recognize and have recognized the next generation worker doesn't want to be in an office 24/7, right? So if you want to attract the best and the brightest, you're going to have some type of a hybrid for flexibility. But the concern in this is a lot of the larger companies are now coming and saying, by the way, I have employees who are coming to me and saying, well, if I'm working remote, I really don't have to be in New Jersey to do it. And if the companies are going to say, you know, well, because I don't want to pay income taxes in New Jersey and I can work from another state. If our companies don't have rules about how far from the home office you could be, we may, you know, become concerned. But I just really want to say the jury is out on this whole thing of what real estate and the return to work looks like, because at the heart of this, from every executive, I hear first and foremost, culture is so important. And nobody can lose sight of the fact that good corporate culture enables people to come together in a way that you just don't appreciate in a remote environment.
Right. Jose, you have I'm imagining many of your prospects kind of put themselves on idle while they were trying to figure all this out. Is that fair to say? Oh, you're muted.
I knew I was going to be the first guy to do that.
It's only been a year, Jose. You should learn about it soon. It's called a mute button.
I know. Hey, I got the camera right. I showered today. It's all good. Look, the companies were, yes, they put a hold on, and while they really tried to figure out what this was going to look like, I still fundamentally believe that a company who's just entering a new market is not going to enter a market remote. They're going to have to bring their teams together because they're going to need to grow their businesses. Now, maybe it's not as big as it once was. Maybe I do think what COVID has, I think, put finally a stake into is that maybe that cool address is no longer really necessary. Maybe you don't need an address on Park Avenue or Fifth Avenue and pay those exorbitant prices. Maybe you need an office that's a little bit closer to your employees where they actually want to live. And so we did see a bit of a slowdown. You're starting to see that little bit of an uptick. And I think folks are trying to look for configurations and structures and layouts that are a little bit creative and a little bit conducive to whatever the new health guidances could be. And so once we're open concepts with, 4 or 5 people around a desk may not be the concept of tomorrow or for the near future, but we're gonna need to set up, and they actually are looking at ways that gives them a little bit of flexibility in some of the spaces they're looking at. And so folks aren't just entering the New Jersey market or committing to come to New Jersey and saying we're going to be fully remote. They're going to need some sort of space. They want some flexibility, and then I think they'll end up growing into it. Look, last year alone in the pandemic, we still had 33 companies commit to New Jersey that are now going to be calling New Jersey home. And so now, majority of them, yes, were international, and yes, the majority of them were smaller in footprint. But like Tim said, those are the ones that we want. We want them to come in at a small footprint, and we want them to grow here in New Jersey.
So, and Tim, how are you handling, I would say, how's Trenton looking at two things? One is this work from home rule on taxation, and whether it's a positive or negative or neutral, or we just can't tell. And that's this question of, if you're working from home, but your job was in New York, do you pay New Jersey taxes? And it's throughout the North, it's just throughout the country, this question, and it's going to be settled by the courts. But the other question is your programs, your program to create jobs oftentimes are targeted to, let's see if we can create a job in Newark or in Trenton, and it's not as impactful. I would imagine you would say it's not as impactful if that person's working remotely in West Windsor or Maplewood. How are you handling both of those, or how are the discussions sounding on both of those issues?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of punt on the taxation question because it's kind of both above my pay grade and out of my lane, and I probably don't know the ins and outs of it enough. But it's certainly a big opportunity and challenge, or opportunity. It's a big challenge. The new bill. That's my daughter. In case anyone's curious, who's yelling in the background. She's like her headphones.
She's got an opinion about it.
She's super hot on the regional taxation question. She's just like, I can't sleep with it. I'm with Michele, broadly speaking, in thinking the jury's still out. I'm skeptical of claims that like people are going to fundamentally change their lives forever, and that people will never want to go back to the office, and that they were going to the workplace will never look the same again. I think there will be some enduring changes. I think one thing that is actually that inures to New Jersey's benefit, I think Jose made this point as well, I think people's perspective on commuting is going to change. The idea of like getting in the car for 45 minutes after you haven't been in the car for 45 minutes in a long time every day, I think it's a hard sell for a lot of people. And I think that's going to change people's perspective on, at least a couple days, a day or two remote work, probably is permanent for a lot of people. But there's such a strong historical correlation between innovation and density. That's Michele's point about culture and that mattering. I think there's going to be both a yearning from a sort of a socialization perspective, but also it's hard to create great content, whether you're a marketing company, whether you're a biotech company, at home in your kitchen. You can do some of the work. You can do a lot of, catch up on your email, and you can do a lot of processing. We've been able to figure it out for a year and a half. That'll be okay. But, R&D and the creative industries and the New Jersey's calling card industries need some interaction. And I think that'll help. Mm-hmm. But I think the sort of the commute revulsion or revolt helps the suburbs a fair bit. It's not great for the urban centers, but I think there's significant opportunities that will come from that as we think about, there were a whole raft of campus sites that we thought were kind of heading the way of the dodo. I think they're more interesting in a post-COVID world than they would have been, absent this change in trajectory. So the new programs provide more flexibility around, Tim, this stuff better than I do, the QBF and the 80% rule and all that good stuff. That there's more flexibility. There's more flexibility in the new programs. One question will be how do you provide some flexibility around existing folks who are in the existing programs and may have adjustment to reality. I think we're open-minded in thinking about how do you think about that the right way. It probably does change the arithmetic of how the reward was calculated. To your point, Tim, of if you're going to buy a bunch of sandwiches in downtown Newark or downtown Jersey City, and that's counted on as part of your economic impact, and now everybody's at home or at home more often, that just changes the arithmetic of how we think about the economic impact of any given activity. So there's gives and gets, and I think that the more time we have to see how things sort out, I think to Michele's point, probably helps bring some more clarity to that situation.
Yeah, we have got a couple questions which are a little interrelated, so I'm gonna maybe throw them together. Start with you, Jose. And ask the question of cost burden in New Jersey, right? So there's two pieces to this. There's the general cost differential to live and do business in New Jersey compared to, let's say, the Midwest or the South. Certainly, we fare better compared to New York than we do Iowa. So how do you handle that in your pitches to companies? And then as part of the whole cost structure, one of our questions here is, how do we approach reining in the cost of the tax structure? And I suspect I wouldn't be surprised if this was property tax related.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have, upon arriving to choose, we've leaned in pretty aggressively and have embraced that we understand that it does cost a bit more in New Jersey to raise a family, to live, and to work. But comparative to our direct competitors, and our direct competitors are Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, and California, the Silicon Valley, when you start to really go toe-to-toe with those, we have a much better proposition. And it is costly, but not as costly as they are. We're not losing a lot of businesses to some parts of Texas and Nebraska's and the Alabamas of the world. So, when you're talking to a prospective company, I often say, give me the other 2 or 3 or 4 states that we are in competition with. And you start to see who our true competitors really are. If someone says, it's Alabama, it's Kentucky, I'm going to head scratch and say, why am I on that list? It doesn't really comport. But when we start to really compete with some of those competitors, look, it's expensive, but it costs something to be considered the #1 place to raise a family. When you have the #1 K-12 systems in the state, and you have some of these, look, our regulations of our utilities kind of allows our utilities to stay on when it gets a little bit chilly outside, right? So when we go toe to toe with Texas, I'm going to beat you left and right on a lot of different areas. And so, yeah, Timmy just got that joke. I'm sorry about that. So look, we lean in for it. We embrace it. We understand it's expensive. But when you have a great place to live, it's going to cost a little bit. And so we try to articulate what that value is to folks.
Michele, and how about your members? So 2 questions. Let's move a little bit. What do your members say about cost? I can't only imagine what the answer is. But more specifically, the minimum wage conversation. The feds are moving to, or at least the administration looks like they're going to try to move to a $15 a minimum wage for the country. And how do we've already of course done that here in New Jersey. How do your members react to the national policy as well as New Jersey's policy?
Yeah, no, great. Let me just start on cost first, because let me just say that there's a reason why we're such a expensive state, and we need reform. And we've advocated tirelessly for decades on the need to go back and look at some of the institutionally broken programs and systems here in the state of New Jersey. And I'll just put forth the Path to Progress, which is a bipartisan 27 step proposal on how we can rein in some costs in New Jersey. It's just really time to get to this agenda. We need more balance as we talk about spending. At the same time, we've got to put reform on the table. So we're a staunch advocate for that. $15 minimum wage. Let me say this, from the national level, bring it on, because we've been ahead of the crowd on this. And so honestly, if everybody's getting up to 15, it makes New Jersey more on par with the cost of labor. The cost of labor in New Jersey is significant because of not just minimum wage. We want everyone to get a fair wage. Any company who wants to hire and attract the best and the brightest is paying a wage that is fair and reasonable, right? And yes, in some cases we have to mandate behavior, and we're getting there. But if this becomes a national platform, it makes New Jersey on par more for that labor cost. The one caveat I'll give though is let's please then stay on par and not say, oh, all of a sudden now we have to catapult ourselves ahead of everyone to show that we're even, doing more here. If we agree that a fair wage is in that space, let's stay in that space as it being a fair wage and not catapult ahead yet again.
We did have a great question here from our friend Colin Newman from Audible, who I think, Tim, this is best poised for you. That is talking about what programs in the new legislation support technology and early stage companies. And I'd even expand it a little bit further. And by the way, how can we help promote those programs once we hear about them? But also talk about a little bit about the innovation economy and your efforts to promote that and what it means to the future of New Jersey's economy.
Yeah, I think the biggest, the game changer, and thanks, I appreciate the question, Colin, is the Evergreen Fund, which is, I think, using tax credits in a pretty different way to bring together big companies, big successful companies with smaller companies that, are going to hope to grow and thrive here in New Jersey. The way this will work, it'll be a $500 million pool of capital by the time we're said and done, which is a significant amount of money that will have large companies. Hang on one second. Jose, you want to pitch hit for me for 2 seconds while I address my daughter's snack needs?
I apologize. We've all been there, so I feel for you, Tim, on that
Yep.
one. And look, Tim should talk a little bit more about the program itself. It's intended to really utilize more mature companies and to invest into small, smarter companies in order for them to grow. And so, look, it was kind of a forward-leaning, forward-thinking sort of program when it was first proposed. I think folks are ecstatic to kind of get that up and going. And we know that they'll spend the next 6 to 10 months really promulgating those rules to actually try to get it out into the market. So I think we can definitely share a little bit more when
Back.
the town's back in you.
It's been procured.
I think we just want to know what the snack was, Tim, because we may want some.
Pretzel chips.
Yeah, it's true. We're all getting hungry.
Some sort of pretzel chip. Clandestinely gotten out of the snack drawer while I was not able to move. So yeah, sorry, sincere apologies. Working from home is not all it's cracked up to be all the time. The opportunity to bring together meaningful direct investment in new startup companies, that the state will be along for the equity ride, which is really exciting. So if a company, if we could help create the next Audible, purposely doing some brand nosing to you, Colin, since you asked the question, it's great for all the investors in Audible, including the state. So the state will take a portfolio approach on this. Some of them will be home runs, some will be strikeouts, and hopefully some will be, a bunch will be in between. But we'll both get the jobs, and also the state will get paid back for its investment and then some. And so we think that's an extraordinary opportunity. That also, it's not just money. There's plenty of venture capital in the world. It's really strategic capital, because it's going to be large taxpayers that buy these tax credits and have to commit to sort of the care and feeding of the innovation ecosystem. So you have, if you're a pharma company, you might commit to using some of your space to host early stage biotech companies on some of your access space, which a lot of them have. If you're a large, financial services or technology company, you might commit to do some of your IT spending from New Jersey-based startups as part of this program. And so it's like strategic capital that would enhance the connectivity between the startups and the big companies in a way that is sort of the hallmark of most successful innovation ecosystems around the country. The bill that the governor signed also soups up the angel investor tax credit, soups up the net operating loss program, and it puts into statute the Ignite program, which is our incubator support program. So a really big suite of what we think is a comprehensive innovation ecosystem set of tools. Last thing I'll say is the governor proposed $10 million just on Tuesday to start a dedicated Black and Latinx early stage seed fund. The statistics on diversity and inclusion around venture capital around the country and around New Jersey are terrible. Less than 2% of venture capital goes to companies founded by people of color. If you cross multiply that by gender and make it women of color, it's less than like 0.5%, which is both an equity and a justice challenge. It's also an economic challenge, because that's a lot of good business plans that aren't getting funded. And so Governor Murphy's really stepped up with some meaningful resources here to do something about it.
That's great. That's great. And most people probably don't recognize, when you talk about a $500 million program like that, while that's an extraordinary amount of money, the leverage that happens behind that is 4 to 10-fold, right? I mean, so you're not, generally speaking, the only investor in that company. You're bringing other investors to the table, maybe outside of the state, into it, and that just triple folds, or even 10 times increases. So it's an extraordinary commitment, and I applaud the governor for that. We did have a question from Chris Cornick from Gilbane, and I think if I read his question right, all of these programs, initiatives, and policies are going to create a significant amount of, if we do this right, significant amount of building, and with a significant amount of building comes a significant amount of permits, and the regulatory process behind it. I know back in, every once in a while, a proposal surfaces that suggests they take the permitting process and do a licensed site professional kind of policy behind it, where you could outsource, or augment the local capacity for permits and approvals. Anybody who's done construction knows what a burden that is. So, Michele, do you have a position on the regulation and trying to figure out ways to streamline these things?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, in the LSRP, the Licensed Site Remediation Program is an excellent example of making the process leaner, without having a negative impact on the environment. We all have to recognize that when we talk about permit modernization, we're not talking about to the detriment of the environment. We're talking about cleaning up a process that's broken. The governor in his budget has advanced money to invest in permit modification. We were very pleased to see that. And it's not just DEP and licensing, but my gosh, let's look at what happened, with the unemployment insurance. And those systems are archaic and broken. We've been advocating at the federal level for some money, actually, nationally, to help with that system, because that is federal money in unemployment, and they should have one system that is more holistic. And in working with our commissioner, Robert Acero Angelo, we've been advocating on his behalf, for some federal investment into that broken fund. But definitely permit modification, there is tremendous opportunity. One caveat, it sounds easier than it is as someone who lived at DEP and was the red tape cutter, if you will. When you get in there and you see what it takes to really change some of these processes, you can go through a lean process on an air permit, and you can take out certain steps and other steps not so easy to do. And number two, there isn't necessarily a cost factor associated with it just because of the underlying expenses that are just inherent in these types of processes.
Yep. Okay. Tim, do you from the policy side of it, do you have any insight into efforts underway?
Yeah, as Michele said, I appreciate her comments on it. The governor proposed, I think it was 15 million for permit modernization and a sort of permit process, which I think is, to Michele's point, I think is largely, and I'm not responsible for it, so I'm sort of speaking without a license here. I think it's going to be Beth Novak and the team, and then Sean and the team at DEP. And lots of other agencies, but DEP was one of the ones that was highlighted. Largely a technology solution. There's a lot of letters that go back and forth. There's a lot of paper that gets pushed around still. And Michele lived this in her prior life. There's reasons why that's the case, and I think that's a big opportunity to just make things go more efficiently again without compromising on all the appropriate, clean water, clean air, clean whatever regulations. So I think there's a big opportunity, and something I know the governor's been focused on, and thinking about other places LSRP can work. That sort of that notion of sort of third-party license certification. I think I agree with Michele's commentary on LSRP, being a success. And we certainly work with lots of them. We try and help clean up sites. And so I think, the question is, where else can that be applied? And I think the answer's got to be, the answer can't be nowhere else. There's probably other places where that could be applied.
Right. I think we are just about time. I do have one more question I'd love an answer to, because it is so near and dear to all of our hearts. The Linda Harrison asks about investment in our transportation system. So certainly the Gateway project is one that's on everybody's mind, but there's probably 1,000 places for investment in our transportation system. Any final thoughts on how the state should be prioritizing these investments, and are we doing enough? Should we do more and do it smarter?
I mean, I'll just jump in to start and say that we absolutely have to find a sustainable funding source for New Jersey Transit. And it can't be new money. We have to go in and we have to be creative. We can't, we're doing a better job, but we're still not there. We're still allowing, capital to be used for operational. And we're still drawing from, other areas of our general fund to support. And I think if we take a long holistic approach on infrastructure and see how important New Jersey Transit is, that ridership is going to get crazy again at some point, right? It's been pretty mellow through COVID, obviously, for the obvious reasons. And I just want to say, Transportation Trust Fund, look, it was very, 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 very difficult to come out and try to support a gas tax years ago, right? Nobody wants to see taxes raised. In return for that, we got the elimination of the estate tax, which is huge for New Jersey residents, right? We need to just make sure that the money that comes in is put to the places that is needed. And we just can't continue to borrow for what we need in that space. We just can't afford it anymore as a state.
Jose, do you hear that from your prospects, that the infrastructure is so important?
Look, absolutely 100%. I think what we take so much for granted is that we have literally one of the best transportation infrastructures in the world, right? We take so much advantage that we can jump on a quick train and we can zip into the city. We can go in to see the Njpac. We could go see a show. We go to Prudential. We can go literally anywhere we want in the state of New Jersey, even down the shore, all by our transportation infrastructure. So our challenges are that we need to operationalize and make some significant investments, because so many other states are not building new rail, right? other states are not building what we already have. And so we have a huge advantage here. We can't lose our advantage. So yeah, of course we have to, you could always spend more and more on infrastructure, right? And so, and as the next generations and the Gen Zers and the millennials are all like not wanting to spend more money on actual individual personalized transportation, there's a heavier reliance on mass transit. And so of course we have to invest more on it.
Yeah. Well, I could do this for another hour, I assure you. I think, but we're right at 6 o'clock. So I think I'd like to try to bring John and Latha back if they're there and can turn back on. And I personally thank you and thank your insights and you guys keep up the good work that you do, the extraordinary work that you do. Having been in a lot of those conversations, I know how hard it is and how hard you work to get things done. So thank you from Njpac and all New Jersey residents. John?
Okay, thank you, Tim. Latha, do you think it's time that Tim Sullivan give that adorable child dinner? Do you think we should?
I do.
Yeah.
He certainly does, yes.
Anyway, thanks to Latha and Deshawn and the Alliance for thinking this up, and it was really a fascinating conversation. We appreciate it enormously. Thanks to everybody who joined us at home. Latha, you have any final words for our friends?
No, just to say thank you very much for a great discussion.
All right, great. I encourage everybody to look for your news and email of our next roundtable, which will be on Thursday, March 25th at 12 noon, lunchtime, when we'll be joined by Senator Robert Menendez, who will talk about New Jersey's relationship with the new administration in Washington. So that should be fun, should be interesting, and I think we'll all learn a lot. Until then, everybody stay well, stay safe, stay home, and Godspeed. Thanks a million. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.